be talking today about how my experience as a cop helped me pair program. I'm going to also be talking about the tools and techniques Braintree uses to establish a culture of pairing. I've been a developer at Braintree for almost 2 years. I'm an attorney, and I was a cop in Baltimore City. I actually became a cop after law school. I worked at a few different prosecutors' offices, and I kept reading exciting stories, and I wanted to be a part of them. I wanted an adventure while helping people, and in hindsight, the Peace Corps was probably the better alternative. What I ended up with was seeing the same objectionable, unconstitutional practices that we see every day in the news now. I saw a warrior and gladiator culture rather than servants of justice. And I saw myself becoming an angrier and more violent person. So I left and I learned a program, and I got a job at Braintree, where my experience working with a partner has helped me excel. This is not a talk on the benefits and consequences of pairing, and this is not a talk to try to convince you to pair. That said, pairing is pretty great. It's a great way to ramp up new developers. It's a great way to solve hard problems, and it's a great way to spread domain knowledge. But it's also scary. You're spending 7 or so hours a day talking to and working directly with another person, and that can be intimidating. People worry that it'll slow them down, or that it'll slow their entire team down. And finding a good balance on how often you should pair can be challenging. There's also some logistic hurdles as your team grows and becomes more distributed. Pairing is a lot of things to a lot of people. To me, it's two people working together on the same machine, whether it's locally or in the cloud, with 2 different keyboards and 2 different monitors to solve a hard problem. At Braintree, we practice ping-pong pairing. This is where person A and person B are pairing together. Person A will write a failing test. They'll switch, and person B will write the code to make that test pass. Person B will then write the next failing test. And they'll switch, and person A will write the code to make that test pass. Braintree practices pairing, and it's a default. That said, small teams are free to decide not to pair or to pair less often. Pairing is part of the interview process where we value communication skills as importantly as technical skills. And our tools are built around pairing. We use Vim and Tmux on VMs managed on infrastructure that we've dedicated to pairing. Vim is a terminal text editor, and Tmux is a useful application that lets you share terminals sessions. When I started, we paired using Mac Pros with 2 different monitors and 2 different keyboards. But this got difficult as we scaled. Not only did we need more of them, but cross-office pairing was actually really challenging. So our infrastructure team set aside some hardware. We provisioned virtual machines on them, and we SSH directly into those. We have a standardized development environment. We all use the same vimrc file and key bindings. And taken together, this provides a low latency, convenient way of collaboration. That said, Vim and Tmux have their drawbacks. They aren't easy tools to use. There's a productivity loss as new people have to learn them. You can't look at online docs together or search Stack Overflow together. Vim is great for Ruby, but not as great when you need to switch gears to something like Java. And to deal with some of these drawbacks, my team, which has been writing a fair amount of Java recently, has been using a mixture of VNC, IntelliJ, while also using Vim and Tmux on machines in AWS. And this has been working out really well for us, despite some sometimes annoying latencies in VNC. I think it's important to do what works for your team, but iterate constantly on that. All right, that is a really large picture of me. All right, police officers are paired for safety, but also for many of the same reasons developers pair. Actually, most patrol offices in Baltimore are not partnered up. But luckily, during my time there, the various units I was in encouraged it. As you might imagine, the training for police in Baltimore is not the greatest. There are some good core concepts, though, while executed poorly, are worth talking about. Field training is a period of time after a 6-month police academy. And as an aside, if a friend tells you that they will commute an hour and a half each way to an intense police academy while taking master's classes at night, where they will end up with about 4 hours of sleep, try to convince them not to do that. Onboarding anyone, whether it's a cop or a dev, is a mixture of teaching by showing and letting a person make mistakes. There's a movie and TV cliche where a rookie cop gets into a car with a veteran cop, and the veteran says something like, "Forget everything they taught you in the academy." This is field training, and this is definitely a sentiment I heard. During field training, you are assigned a primary field training officer that you begin and end the 12 weeks with. You start off shadowing that person, and by the end, they are shadowing and evaluating you. And during that time, you're doing everything that a cop would normally do. You're responding to calls, you're patrolling an area, you're getting into foot chases and fights. And this ends up being a formalized apprenticeship with a few drawbacks. Mainly that your quality of training depends entirely on your field training officer. And there were some that genuinely cared about training new cops, but many did it for the extra money that was provided, and some did it so that their trainee did all their paperwork. There were some good lessons I learned, and I've tried to apply that to onboarding new developers. Pairing is so great for onboarding. Starting at a new company or in a completely new field, as many of us have, is tough. I was at Braintree for only 7 months before having to train a group of new developers myself. And I tried to strike the same balance of teaching by showing, but moving to encouraging self-sufficiency while evaluating and providing feedback. And this worked out well. I think as a new dev myself, my past experience with this field training program helped me with the otherwise daunting task of training new developers. All right, what is a talk on policing without a car chase story? I was a pretty new cop when I got in my first one. I was driving, it was pretty late, and my partner and I rolled up on what turned out to be a burglary with a stolen vehicle. I saw someone carrying something large. I saw him look over at us, drop everything, and sprint to his car. The car took off, and I pursued. This chase ended up being about 12 minutes, and I was the primary officer until we crossed city limits. 12 minutes is a long time for a police chase. Something like 70% of chases that end in a collision ended in the first 6 minutes. So I want to take a step back and talk about everything that needed to happen in order for this chase to be a responsible decision. I had to drive so that I wasn't putting anyone else in danger. I had to drive so that I wasn't forcing the suspect to put anyone else in danger. I needed to be thinking about where the chase was headed. My partner needed to be communicating where our location at all times. He needed to be responding to questions from dispatch and our supervisors. We were primary officers, and that meant we had to be constantly evaluating where we wanted other officers to be. This crossed jurisdictions into Baltimore County, so my partner needed to be communicating with Baltimore County officers and dispatch. And we both needed to be evaluating whether or not to continue this chase and whether it was safe to do so. We had to do all of this while managing tunnel vision. And tunnel vision is where you are entirely focused on one thing and you lose track of everything else. This was over 3 years ago, and I still have vivid memories of the driving, but I can't really remember what my partner was saying over the radio. Driving is probably the part I miss the most about being a cop, but doing it responsibly is difficult. That said, my partner and I were able to ensure a responsible and relatively safe chase because we divided labor. I was allowed to focus on driving while my partner on communication, and we both used our judgment on whether or not to continue. In case you were wondering, this chase did end in a collision minutes after the other jurisdiction took over, when one of their officers, for some reason, drove straight at them, forcing them to swerve into an electrical post. I think pairing is best when you split responsibilities, and I think it's fairly obvious that while your pair is working, you shouldn't be checking Slack or email. But of course, there are exceptions, and communication during those exceptions is important. I think a far more common pitfall in pairing is a desire to act like a compiler. You forgot a paren, you misspelled that variable. I think this comes from like a place of wanting to help, but it's not actually dividing labor, and it's not making the most of pairing. Pairing should be about giving feedback about their design choices. And if you see potential pitfalls with the way they're going down, of course bring that up. Refactoring options are great, but make a mental note of them and save them for when the tests are passing. That way, you don't interrupt your pair's flow. I think most importantly, dividing labor is about thinking about how your paired solution fits into the larger context of what you're trying to do. And before moving on, I mentioned earlier about tunnel vision, and pairing is a great way to avoid it, but only if you're both on the lookout for it. Otherwise, you end up with two people with tunnel vision instead of one. And I've definitely noticed tunnel vision in a few operations in production, which honestly can feel almost as scary as a car chase. All right. I'm very much an introvert. As a cop, I had to deal with communicating with my partner, members of the community, criminals, and other officers for sometimes up to 14 hours a day. And I don't have any specific stories about this because it was more of a constant challenge for me. And the key for me was to take regular breaks and good communication. Communication was so critical. It was important to communicate with each other when we weren't 100% there. For example, my partner once let me know that he was having issues at home and he was a little distracted. Knowing that, I acted more cautiously, knowing that my partner wasn't 100% there. And I think breaks in communication are just as important for developers. Not only are breaks great for productivity, but they are also crucial for staying sane. I think take regular breaks and push back if your pair is resistant. The Pomodoro technique, where you do work in 25-minute intervals, works really well for me because it's completely automated. And let your pair know if you didn't sleep well or you're distracted. It's a little thing, but it means a lot. All right. I'm bringing this up towards the end because safety or code quality, to me, is not the most important reason to pair. I mentioned earlier that the default in Baltimore City was actually not to have a partner. And in those situations, safety comes from having many officers in close proximity with each other. Backup was always a radio call away. A Signal 13 is a radio call that pretty much results in the entire district getting to you really quickly. I was on foot one night, waiting for my partner who was grabbing a bite from Subway, when I saw a pickup truck crash into a taxi. I saw the pickup truck start to reverse and drive away. After doing a brief check with the driver of the taxi to make sure he was okay, I sprinted after the car and got lucky that I caught him on a side street when he hit traffic. As a side note, this incident gave me the reputation in my unit for chasing cars on foot. When I got up to the car, I noticed two things: a Marine Corps sticker on the bumper and the door starting to open. Now, out popped a very large, noticeably intoxicated man with one of those small baseball bats. I'd been calling out my position on the radio for the entire time, actually, so I knew backup was about a minute away, but that still left me with a man that I knew I wouldn't want to fight with. Luckily, I was able to use communication skills to talk him down, surrender peacefully, drop the bat. But this whole situation would have been a lot safer and a lot less terrifying for me had my partner been there with me at the time. We all care about code quality, and pairing is only one way to ensure it. Code review and pull requests work really well. That said, even if you don't pair all the time, recognize the scenarios that are tricky. The car stops of programming, if you will, and see if it makes sense to bring someone else in. I think a project's overall quality, in the end, depends on communication and trust with your team. And this is stuff that is inherent to pairing in order for it to be effective, too. All right. There are a few bad habits I picked up while I was a cop that were hard to break. I'm not talking about driving a little too fast, but there is this concept of a thin blue line, which is meant to be a symbol of camaraderie between police officers. It's been used as a justification for a lack of a better phrase, an anti-snitch workplace. I've known brave officers that have reported other officers to their supervisors, and the reaction to this by a district was always, well, I guess we'll drive a little slower the next time they ask for help. Think about that. Like, reporting another officer can literally get you hurt. So you don't report anyone or complain. If you notice someone slacking off, you acted accordingly, whether that was picking up their slack or not putting yourself in a dangerous position because you knew you didn't have backup. This was necessary for my safety as a cop, but not as great as a new developer. At Braintree, I had a coworker who almost completely stopped working for about a month. They would show up and just not do any work. My team picked up the person's weight, but I never brought it up to my manager or that person because I still had that mentality, the thought that telling on someone was not okay. And I regret that to this day, not because I wish to see them get in trouble, or not because I was bitter about the extra work, but because feedback is so essential to growth as developers and as people, and I didn't give it. All right, to close, people often ask me about the biggest differences between my life then and now. It's not the greatly increased salary, although that's not too bad. And it's not the lack of adrenaline, violence, and danger, although I'm glad that's all behind me. It's the community and how smart, welcoming, and open you all are. Thank you for that, and thank you for listening. Feel free to find me if you have any questions.
You can answer one or two if you want. Yeah.
Does anyone have questions? Is there a hand? Hey, the lights are bright. All right, what's up? Yeah. The question was, what do I mean by tunnel vision? And what I mean by that is, like,